Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we're talking about a classic, The Adventures of Robin Hood from 1938.
That's right.
Swashbuckling, Errol Flynn, Olivia de Havilland, Claude Rains.
Directed by Michael Curtiz.
And starring Basil Rathbone as well.
Yes, it's an all-star,
Michael Curtiz and William Kiley, the directors, jointly credited.
Are they jointly credited?
Yeah, it said, I noted right at the start, I
Okay.
pointed out to you, didn't I? It said it's directed by Curtiz and Kiley.
Oh, because I know that Kylie was fired from it.
Well, maybe that's
but
why.
I didn't know that they were both credited.
It certainly is at the start of the film.
Right, okay.
I noticed it. Because we were talking just the other day about DGA credits and how you're only allowed one, and because we were talking about Bohemian Rhapsody and how the director changed on that. So.
Right, okay.
So, yeah, I know. But, any thoughts on the dual directors?
You can really tell in many scenes that it's directed by Michael Curtiz. All of the ones that have gradations of light, the use of the shadows. In fact, I was watching a film on Technicolor and the development of Technicolor, and they said that one of the first things to go out the window when Technicolor came in was shadows. So, the cinematography had become very sophisticated in black and white by that point. But actually, 3-strip Technicolor, one of the tendencies was just to light up everything so that you would get the brightest color possible.
Well, you had to, because you needed to split the light coming into the camera into 3 separate. You need to split it into red, green, and blue.
Yes.
And so you needed much more light just to actually make it work.
So one of the first things that was sacrificed with that was actually, things like shadows and the gradations and so, and so on.
There is a flat look to everything. It's a lot. I mean, one of the things is that it's early days of 3-strip Technicolor when they're making this, and I think you and I were both pointing out just like there's colour everywhere, because there's like an excitement about it, really. And I mean, at one point we noticed there was a pepper in a fruit bowl.
Yes.
And the only reason can possibly be that it adds colour.
Exactly.
But
I love that.
Yeah.
It's glorious, and I find the Technicolor cheery and joyous.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's
but
wonderful.
I'm keen to know what you think, really.
Well, I thought the same about that. I mean, particularly sort of for the first half of the film, where it's just enormously sort of exciting, and you're just watching watching Errol Flynn going around. We were talking about him being like a lad.
Yes.
It's like him and the lads.
Yes.
He kind of. I mean, one thing that I think is perhaps a little lacking about that early section of the film is that the revolution that he's kind of building up to it's a bit weak. It's kind of actually what he's really doing. He seems to be just kind of messing around, really. Like when they meet Friar Tuck, he kind of just plays a prank on him, and all the other merry men are hiding behind the bushes, and they all laugh, and it's kind of charming and funny. But he's basically being like a lout, and it's not until later in the film that the revolution actually becomes a revolution.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I mean, what I like about the thing with Little John and the priest is that Robin Hood ends up being the butt of his own joke and accepts it heartily. Yeah. So, he gets beaten by Little John and laughs about it instead of being angry and
Yeah, and the friar bests him in a sword fight in the river, or holds his own at least.
Holds his own, yeah. And then he's all welcoming and forgiving, and so there's a kind of a good-naturedness to the whole thing that is very infectious. It's really cheery.
Yeah, and he's witty, he's charming, and he's that kind of character who sees the funny side in everything.
Yes.
Sort of thing. A little bit like Archer. In the TV show Archer, like he always the thing about Archer that I love is that no matter what kind of dangerous situation he's in, he's like hanging off the side of a building and he's got helicopters aiming bombs at him, and he's just laughing and finding it really funny. That's kind of Errol Flynn in this.
Yeah, I'm kind of enthralled at the moment with Errol Flynn. Actually, I've been going kind of as systematically as I could through all of the films that he did with Michael Curtiz, and it's interesting because, paradoxically, he's someone who I feel ever since I've been interested in cinema, I've known about, and of course I've seen some of his films, but you know, everybody talks about how handsome he was and so on. And I never quite got it, yeah, until I saw him in motion. You know, I mean, obviously he's a good-looking man, but I didn't think he was like, whoa, you know, like so much to write home about.
No, but it's his charm, and his gesture and his expressions, that sort of thing.
He exudes happiness. I don't know how to describe it. You know, he exudes joy.
Joie de vivre.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, he clearly like loves people, and he loves people in all their kind of, you know, weaknesses. And yeah, so he's surrounded by people who are either not very bright or very greedy, or you know, and he kind of accepts it all about them. You know, he's like a kind of a cheery, accepting presence in all of it. You know, who moves beautifully. You know, so I kind of, I just, and he was, it's very interesting because he was the great action figure of his day, right? So, and it's interesting to think about those things. So the film is a remake of, you know, the Douglas Fairbanks silent film, which I've never seen, you know, though I have read on Fairbanks. And, you know, kind of Fairbanks was also the action figure of his day, you know, and he's kind of seen to be representative of that kind of, you know, American optimism, and he's always in motion, and he moves really gracefully, and, you know, so, and it's interesting to compare, you know, well, we've just seen Errol Flynn, but, you know, to action figures of other eras, so to, like, say, you know, Burt Reynolds in the 70s, or Schwarzenegger in the 80s, you know, or maybe Matt Damon now. You know, they're very, very different, you know, kind of people who do action movies. You know, and they maybe it's just me projecting, but you think they represent their era in some way. You know, they say something about, you know, what an ideal, you know, figure of masculinity and, you know, daring do is for each period. It tells a lot, you know. So you have the cyborg figure of, you know, of Schwarzenegger, quite dark and machine-like and so on, as opposed to, like, you know, kind of Errol Flynn, who's, you know, just graceful,
light and airy, and
and kind of charming and cheeky and
and witty. You know, there's that wonderful bit. There's a great line where he Olivia Havilland, Maid Marian, at one point says, you know, "You speak treason," and he goes, and he sort of flashes a grin, and he goes, "Fluently." Brilliant. I really love that. And that's what that scene's full of.
Yes.
And then, of course, it descends into a sword fight because it does. Yeah. And what I loved about the action, and I think this is definitely watching it with a kind of ironic sort of distance because it's 80 years later.
Yes.
What I like about the action is that I reckon I could do everything that they did in this just as well. Like there's an aesthetic to it. The way it looks now is like a load of amateurs having a go at having a sword fight, which I know is not what it was. Yes. I know it was like this was premiere action of the day.
It was.
But
it was a huge hit.
But to modernise, it doesn't look like that anymore.
Well, you know, this is something that I've remarked upon in the past, and that fascinates me. You know, so like when James Cagney or Errol Flynn, actually James Cagney more than Errol Flynn, like, you know, our ideas of what spectacular action are change over time. So, you know, James Cagney throws somebody a punch and that's it, the fight's over, right? Like, you know, or it lasts 2 or 3 punches, right? But, you know, kind of, I suppose the idea was then the 2 or 3 punches were enough to put any man down if they landed right? You know, so, and to us now, it just seems like...
as sensibilities change, it starts to look very silly.
Yeah.
And you just have to keep in mind that that's not the way it looked. I mean, another thing I was thinking was... how would this film have gone across to... How would it have come across to English audiences of the time?
Yes.
Because today we look at it... Today, if you get an American version of an English story, generally, English audiences will find things to laugh at in it because there'll be inaccuracies, there'll be silly things that, you know, kind of cultural misunderstandings, that sort of thing. But you pointed out that, like, this is an anti-monarchist sort of tale. To a degree.
It's a very democratic story.
Right.
It's a very Depression American story, in fact.
And this was an era where, you know, you couldn't take the piss out of the Queen, you couldn't take the piss out of politicians even in England.
Yes.
You know, people are a lot more deferential.
Yeah, I'd be
Back
curious to know, because actually that kind of reception would be easy to investigate, right? You just, you know, you look at the reviews of the Times and the Daily Mail or whatever, and you know, figure out how it was received, or you know, Graham Greene or Dilys Powell, or you know, so that kind of would not be difficult to find out. I'm assuming it was a big hit. I certainly haven't heard anything contrary. But I think it is a very American story, or a very American take on the story, in the sense that it is about kind of collectively coming together to fight oppression. You know, so in that sense, it's a very Warner Brothers film, you know, and also it's very conciliatory, right? It's kind of, it brings together Anglo-Saxons and Normans, and we're all Englishmen, right? You know, which is kind of, you know, I find that kind of interesting, really, in terms of, you know, kind of the politics of the day. And now, actually, it's almost like, I mean, you know, I hate to be bringing up Brexit into all my readings of every film.
We always do, I do.
Yeah, but you can't help, you know, when looking at films, you can't help but relate it to your own kind of life and understanding and context. And actually, one of the things that comes across is how generous spirited this film is, you know, in contrast to this us, them, you know, fuck off Europe, let me suck your ass America kind of attitude that we're living through at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, there's only one, maybe two kind of full-on villains in the film.
Yes.
Basil Rathbone is the central figure.
Yes.
And I guess Claude Rains as well as Prince John, but he comes less into direct conflict with Robin.
Yes.
But, you know, apart from that, kind of, he's very... Robin is sort of very accepting of everybody. It does come through, I think, a certain level of... I think in his character there's a certain feeling of superiority conveyed as well, though. Like he can afford to be nice to his enemies because he knows he's better than them. He knows that he will best them in a fight.
Yes. Except then you find out that he doesn't. That's why the Little John incident is so interesting.
Well, those guys, those guys can knock him off a log or something. But when it comes to actually fighting someone when it's a fight to the death, he's not going to fail.
Well, it's true, but again, that in itself, I suppose, is an ideal of American democracy, right? Which is a meritocracy. It's kind of, you know, it's an aristocracy of worth or of merit, right? It's not this idea that all men are equal, but that they should all be treated equal, you know, and kind of, you know, the differences as they might exist are difference of physical power, or beauty, or strength, or money, you know, but that actually fundamentally everyone is the same. And I think what he exudes is, you know, a kind of, you know, a superiority of physique and charm and so on. There's no question about that.
You never get the feeling with his character, I guess, that he's out of control at any point.
Also, you never get the feeling that he's not democratic. So, you know, I mean, I suppose there's this difference that, you know, the difference between everybody being equal, or, you know, the notion that everyone should be treated equally, it's kind of, you know, it's not the same, because, you know, I mean, even in the most ideal democracy, there will always be differences. I mean, people are innately different. Some are tall, some are shorter, some are good looking, some are not good looking, some, you know, are more intelligent or learn faster, or, you know, some, you know, have, you know, physical ailments or whatever. So I think, you know, it's the question of, you know, how you treat people and how inclusive you are with people and so on, that is the thing. And that I find the film very democratic.
I can see why you find kind of positives there, but I don't think that his character at any point feels like he's out of control in a scene. Feels like things are beyond his control and that he has to fight to get them back. He's never put in a position where he is really the underdog.
Well,
or at least he never feels like it. You know, it's never conveyed that way. You never feel like he has to actually climb out of a bad situation and make it a good one for himself.
That's not true. And in fact, you know, it's that the particular scene I have in mind, which is the one where he's been, you know, he's kidnapped, or he's caught, you know, he's sent to the gallows, and he's about to be hanged, right? And actually, instead of him doing something about it, his whole community comes forth to rescue him.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just
still. I never feel like there's enough peril on him. I never feel not enough peril, but I never feel that that's what the film is. It's just that thing of you know that the guy is going to win in the end.
Sure,
because he's
the star of the movie.
and it's,
but is that something that you mind that is a problem for you?
It's not a problem, but I just think it's a slight tweak to, the reading that like he's so kind of magnanimous. I think that kind of magnanimity and generosity and democracy would come across more strongly were he in a position where it was actually at stake for him. It never feels quite like it's a stake enough for him. It feels like he can afford to be so nice and stuff because he never is ever going to get into any peril that really troubles him. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, and I almost agree, but I do think that I suppose him being on the verge of being hung is an incident. Also, I think there's something kind of lovely about, him risking his life to climb up Maid Marian's window and declare his love,
Yeah.
And that's a risk. Now, we might not experience it as a risk because, we know the conventions of cinema, we know nothing's going to happen to the star. It's also true that the optimism and cheeriness and joy and health and all of that Errol Flynn exudes kinds of makes it difficult to see that he'd find the problem he couldn't get out of.
Yeah.
But actually, I think that's also part of what makes him him and the pleasures that his star persona has to offer. Because, other people you would sense they would be more imperiled or more in pain or, you can imagine John Garfield or somebody like that, right? And they'd be tortured about the danger they were in. But that's not Errol Flynn, and what Errol Flynn has to offer, I think, is at least of equal value.
Yeah. It's a different type of kind of hero. It's a different type of action.
Yes,
it's incredibly enjoyable. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying it's not enjoyable. I just think there is a slight nuance to that reading of kind of the generosity of his character that is modified slightly by...
Yes. I suppose, the phrase,
smile.
a man amongst men, kind of, does indicate a certain kind of superiority. Yeah. He's not number Z523, right? Yeah. He's number 1, right? So...
Again, it's a little bit like Archer, where, no matter what happens to Archer, he somehow is always going to survive. And in Archer, it gets to the point where he knows that, which is why he's able to find everything so funny. And he says as much in dialogue in that show, nothing bad ever happens to me. I don't know why I'm so lucky.
The reason why I wanted you to see this with me is because you remember when we went to View Cinemas and they have like all of these posters at the entrance, right, of these classic films, right? And actually I was thinking of doing something on Curtiz, and it struck me that they had 2 films, right, that were by Curtiz. So they only had 8 posters of like the history of cinema represented in 8 posters. And 2 were by Curtiz.
Yeah.
And actually they were Casablanca and Robin Hood. And really, kind of, they're both classics, but they're really neither of them thought to be great films, if one can make those distinctions, right? Like, kind of, they're
I don't know if that is the case with Casablanca. I do think its reputation is...
Well, we can argue about that. I actually think...
But I do agree on the case with Adventures of Robin Hood. That
it's a classic film. Everybody loves them. But people who write about the art of cinema don't think that neither, Casablanca has anything complex or rich or any commentary on the human condition or any, kind of developments in the form or like any of the ways in which you can kind of say, this is, an example of the art of cinema. I actually don't think that people would have made those arguments about Casablanca, enjoyable as it is, in the ways that we talked about in that podcast, and I share in those enjoyments. But anyway, I was just struck.
It's certainly not the case with Adventures of Robin Hood. It somehow doesn't fit with the... I can't remember what the other films were, but it somehow stood out.
It was like Blade Runner and Kubrick.
Yeah, but I think... But the point is, like, every other film definitely fits. You went, this is part of the canon.
Yes.
And Adventures of Robin Hood did stand out.
Yes.
Though...
I mean, it is a de facto classic.
Yeah.
You know, it was re-released umpteenth times. You know, it's shown, on television. People love the color. The Korngold score is like an acknowledged classic, and a real kind of contribution to the art of scoring films. It was kind of seen as very modern in its time. And of course, it's got a supporting cast that is to die for, right? Like, Claude Rains he's always fantastic.
He's the best.
But this has Eugene Pallette as well, who's at least as good. I love Here Comes... what is the Lubitsch film? Here Comes Mr. Jordan, something like that? The one about going to hell.
Heaven Can Wait.
Heaven Can Wait.
43.
Yeah. He's fantastic in that. He's like a millionaire who doesn't talk to his wife, and his daughter has run off and married like this roue who sleeps with everybody. And he's just got like some skits in there that are marvelous. He's a marvelous comic actor. And he's a joy to watch. And actually, one of the interesting things that I've been trying to go through all of these Errol Flynn films, Michael Curtiz films. And one of the characters who always appears is Alan Hale, who plays Little John in this, right? And, in some of the films, like in The Seahawk and, Dodge City, I just love seeing the interactions between Errol Flynn and him. It's almost like a kind of love, it's like, what we now call a bromance or something. But, there's just kind of like this really easy but deep kind of affection, right, between two men where, like, the issue of sex is not there, right? Yeah. And I really like that about, kind of their interaction in all of these films. You see it much less in this because actually they have less, their big scene together is a fight scene.
Yeah.
And in the rest of the film he appears almost on his own or as part of a group, but I kind of, but I love that easy camaraderie that you see in this film actually as well, but kind of more developed in other films in the series. What other aspects of the film kind of caught your eye?
There are stylistic aspects that have become so sort of enshrined in cinematic kind of lore and technique that they, them almost through parody more than you do through actual kind of genuine use of them. Such as the sort of the hero jumping down and standing there, hands on his hips, and look, that it's that Errol Flynn stance.
Yes.
But like that, and kind of looking off, sort of the camera's below him, and he looks off into the middle distance or into the distance, and he's heroic, and that's been parodied sort of countless. And I suppose it goes along a little bit with what I was saying about the action, seeming a little tame or amateur by today's standards. That I think it's harder to. I think it's harder to watch the film, kind of genuinely getting into it, than it was for me to watch Casablanca and genuinely get into it. I think there were things in this that I was feeling more distance with. The action and the sets and that sort of thing. They felt more. I don't know if to put it like of their time, or just that things have developed to the point where this now looks quite simple in some respects.
Yes, I can see it is very much of its time. Yet I love it. I think it's maybe the second or third time that I've seen it in the space of a month.
Yeah.
And well, as you saw, I kind of. I still get enthralled.
Yeah, I think the stuff that I really connected with though was the way that the character came out. So when the action's happening, it was not hugely exciting to me, but it's the way that the character expressed himself through the action.
Yes.
And the way that as we said, like he's having a good time while he's having a fight, and the way he's being creative in the fight and that sort of thing. That's what I connected with.
Yes, I mean, I think that's an interesting distinction, actually. So there's a difference between the way, the action scenes being of their time and our way of looking at it, which, it has a distancing effect. So some of the things of their being of their time is a distancing effect. For example, you do realize that, like, some of the action scenes are shot at a lower speed, so that when they're projected, they feel cranked up, they move faster, right? So you're meant to get the impression that actually the characters are moving faster than they would normally, but actually it just looks jerky to us now, doesn't
Yeah.
it? So you can see that the sound has been dubbed on an image that has been filmed, kind of at a different speed. The film has been speeded up, and that now seems like jerky and inelegant, so there are those aspects to it. And yet on the other hand, there are some aspects of the action in this film that I like more than now. So I like, for example, the way that the film is often shot, at a distance, right? Or in a medium long shot, so that you could see people doing the action. And often sometimes in a longish or relatively longish take, right? Again, for the same purpose. So you actually see Errol Flynn jumping off a tree and he lands on the floor, right? And there's something kind of beautiful about seeing him jump off the tree and landing on the floor. Whereas, I was thinking you see a Bourne film and there would have been 55 cuts, right?
Yeah, well, I guess the term for it these days is intensified continuity.
Yes.
Where cuts of very disparate things are put together to give you an impression of things that have happened. Whereas in the Adventures of Robin Hood, you see, generally speaking, things happen.
Yes.
They may, bits in the middle may be cut out. Like, for instance, when he jumps out of a tree, you may see a shot of him jumping out, and then a second shot where he's on the ground landing.
No, actually, in this shot, you see him doing the whole thing.
Sure, but there are shots like that too.
Yeah, sure.
Where things are edited and sped up, and so it's not like watching a stage play. I mean, it's a film. It has been edited to present what it's doing, but it's not as intense as that, and it's not giving you information that you can't sort of relate. You can relate every single shot to the ones around it, kind of geographically and in sense of who's doing what and that sort of thing.
I mean, I love the Bourne films, but I do think that some things are gains. For example, you can create a sense of speed and excitement through rapid editing, right? Also, you can get stunt people with better bodies and who can do actions better to do those actions. But actually, what they don't provide, that this film provides, is, seeing the star or an actor complete most of their actions, right? And so I'm not saying that they didn't have stuntmen then, obviously they did, right? But the film judges those things. So, kind of some things you don't see and it's just part of a, but actually it does take the moment to linger and show you Errol Flynn is doing this, wow, right? And actually there's an appreciation of what the body can do in motion, and the grace of that and the skill in that I kind of value and appreciate. You find it amateur,
No, amateur is being a little strong, but it's
Okay.
I mean, what I found amateur was actually the performance of the actions. Like I say, when I'm watching Errol Flynn swinging a sword or jumping over a stool or something, I'm going, I can do exactly that and I will look just as good. That's kind of how that looks. It's very...
Well, but that's a wonderful thing. That in itself is very democratic.
I enjoyed that
to make
too.
people feel that, right?
That's what I felt. That's where the kind of amateur element crept into it for me. But I did enjoy that. I did enjoy feeling like everything that is being done here, I could definitely do that.
So you were mentioning something about the sets and...
Well, it reminded me really of Hook at points.
Oh.
Which was 1991, I think. Steven Spielberg film, which I really, really love, and we should watch it on. We should watch it together and do a podcast on it one day.
Very critically derided.
Critically derided. People hated it, and it came kind of. I think it was huge. It was a huge production. It had these massive sets
and massive stars.
And I think it may have come just sort of at the wrong time. People were just about getting sick of things on its sort of scale or of its type, and it didn't grab people. But I really love that film. Obviously, it came out when I was 3, so I wouldn't have even seen it at the cinema. But I watched it when I was a little kid at home, and I just watched it countless times. I love it. But there are stylistic things. So people who are aware of Spielberg and his kind of 70s gang, like Scorsese and Coppola and that, of being huge fans of films from the 1930s and 40s, and they talk about films like The Adventures of Robin Hood as inspirations for their own And having not seen the Adventures of Robin Hood before, and kind of forgetting that sort of link, it was staring me in the face. You know that like so much in Hook specifically is copied is too strong, but definitely heavily inspired by the way that things are shot in Robin Hood, or the way that things are designed. So you know the kind of the Peter Pan green tights and the green sort of outfit. Okay, like that is historically what Peter Pan. That's how he was sort of designed in the illustrations or whatever. And Robin Hood historically was wearing green as well. That's coincidence, but it's also they're the same. And when Errol Flynn is stood up on a ledge, kind of overlooking the merry men, like that's exactly a shot that has been copied in Hook, where Peter Pan is doing the same thing. He flies, so he lands on it, but it's the same shot that's being replicated. These huge sets, which, I mean, there are early shots in The Adventures of Robin Hood where all the action and all the people are in the bottom half of the frame. And the entire top half of the frame is just the set. Yeah. It's like saying, just look at our big set.
Yes.
You know, we want to show off that we built a big set.
Of course.
And there's a lot of that in Hook as well. I think it's a little more elegant in Hook, but they do have that enormous crane shot right at the start where you overlook the entire sort of harbour with all the shops and things in Hook, which is there to show off a massive, expensive set. And you know, so much the sword play, for instance, when the kind of the huge gangs of people that get involved in fights. You know, so like there's a central fight in this, which is between Basil Rathbone and Errol Flynn. But everyone else in the background in the castle is fighting as well.
Yes.
And you know the same sort of thing happens multiple times in Hook, where Peter Pan is fighting Captain Hook, or Peter Pan is fighting Rufio, and in the background there's loads more action going on, and you just get this sense of a huge sort of amount of action all happening in one space. Again, it's exactly the same. It's derived directly from it. And I mean, when I talk about sort of watching The Adventures of Robin Hood with an ironic distance, actually, if you look at Hook, so much of the same sort of stuff is being done, but I don't have that ironic distance with that because I grew up with that.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's been kind of translated into, okay, so that film is actually 27 years old now. Hook. Yes. So you know that's an old film to a lot of people, but still sort of in a more modern film, that kind of aesthetic and those sort of ideas and techniques are made sort of easy to buy into.
Yes.
You know, in a way that, so I don't have that distance watching Hook, whereas I do have it watching Adventures of Robin Hood. But I'm sure, I imagine it's a case of probably if I had grown up watching Adventures of Robin Hood on TV or something, I would probably not feel that way. Maybe that's an element of, maybe that kind of acclimatization is an element of getting rid of that distance that you feel.
I wonder if you have any comment on the various versions, because part of the reason for, my wanting to see this with you is also that there's a new version coming out just in a month or so.
Yeah, the kind of Guy Ritchie-ish one.
Yeah. So it's with there are two versions actually. There's one with Taron Egerton.
I think the other one you're thinking of is the 2013 one with Russell Crowe.
2010.
2010 maybe.
Yeah. So
I never saw that one.
The Taron Egerton one is coming out. There was the Russell Crowe one. There was the Kevin Costner one, which I've seen. There's of course the Walt Disney one.
That's the only other one I have seen.
Yeah, I remember also watching the television series.
Oh yeah.
There was a Disney series of it. So it's kind of a narrative that just won't die. So and of course we've mentioned the Douglas Fairbanks 1920s or the silent version. It might be 1919 actually. Let me look it up. 1922. So there's a 1922 version with Douglas Fairbanks Sr.
There are just tons though. Look at this list.
Yeah.
Hundreds of versions.
So it's kind of a narrative that persists.
Yeah.
And actually, it's useful to speculate on why it persists, right? Because obviously, Robin Hood is an outlaw, right? But he's fighting for justice. So in a way, he's the precursor to practically, every superhero. And in fact, you could argue actually that the Green Arrow is kind of obviously based on it. And also there's this thing. So he's not like a peasant, right? So he is like a Sir Locksley.
So Robin of Locksley.
Yeah, and is a baron. Right, so he's a wealthy, and of course, like, these superhero figures, they're all wealthy, but they're all fighting for the poor, and they all lead a revolution, and they reinstate justice and order, right, against the rich and powerful, right? So it is interesting that, that's a kind of, I think myth that persists.
I think the nobleman version of him is just one version. I don't think he always was.
Right.
But it's certainly the version in this, and it is a version of him. Because I haven't seen the new film yet, but I get the feeling from the trailer that he's not supposed to be a nobleman. You get the feeling in that, don't you, that he's a kid and sort of down on his luck, and he's going to come up from nowhere to lead a revolution. That's the impression you get.
Okay, that's interesting.
Because he wasn't a real guy. He's a legendary sort of folkloric figure.
Yeah.
So you can put your own spin on him.
Yes.
Walt Disney made him into a fox.
But actually, that's what's so interesting about these mythic narratives, that they're so flexible and adaptable, and they lend themselves to so many versions, but they nonetheless, have elements in common. Yeah.
Yeah, and generally, as you say, it's the fighting the powers that be, and the classic kind of line that goes along with Robin Hood in pretty much every version is steals from the rich and gives to the poor.
Yes.
That's really heavily associated with him, and. I do sometimes think that, like, in watching a fictional narrative of someone who is able to lead resistance and fight the power and achieve great things and that sort of thing, it's that escapism thing. If it excuses you from doing it in your own life.
Well, I don't know. Does it excuse you or does it encourage you? I mean. Kind of.
You go to the cinema to get that kick, and then you go home and you've had it.
Well, I'm not sure about that, because one of the definitions of art is that it should always show you, the way that things should be, the way that they are in the gap in between, kind of, embodying all those contradictions, right? But kind of the gap between a utopian ideal of how the world should be. And then kind of your own realization that there's a distance between the world you live in and the way that things should be. So actually, sometimes just by showing something glorious and beautiful and, where everything works out, that actually, can be, a path to action and to enlightenment and to action on its own, arguably.
Yeah, it could be. Maybe that reflects then more on me and I'm just lazy.
Anyway, but I think this version of Robin Hood is certainly all of those things,
Yeah. Wouldn't it be interesting if the new one turned out to be good?
Well, we'll have to go see it now.
We'll have to go and see it.
Yeah. I'm very keen on seeing the Douglas Fairbanks version, because actually now I'm ashamed that I haven't seen it, really. I must make more of an effort to see it.
I want to see that. I want to see the Kevin Costner one because I know it's between Kevin Costner and Russell Crowe.
I couldn't even bring myself to see the Russell Crowe version.
He got so much stick for it. Didn't he get really annoyed at an interviewer for telling him that his accent wasn't very good? Or I asked him why the accent changed, and he's like, "What are you talking about? My accent's fantastic."
My accent's fantastic. Let me throw my phone at you.
So anyway, that in a way is one of the pleasures of Robin Hood. Is as an English person, it's really enjoyable to see how Americans get into cultural holes with it, where they misunderstand certain things. You go, that's not what it's like.
You see, that's why they invented the Green Arrow or Arrow, so they wouldn't have to put up with snooty Englishmen kind of criticizing their accents. They could say, "Fuck you, we don't need you or your accent." That might be a good note to end on.
But that's one of the joys. Like, when Americans come in and take our stories, then we have the right to be snooty about it.
Well, can come up with new stories.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I enjoyed saying that.
Yes, I think it's as great as it ever was. I found it completely enjoyable and got a kick out of the same things that I always do. And I loved, the color, the score, Errol Flynn, the supporting cast. I do think that it's one of those things where, it's better not to look for too much depth. It's not necessarily there. But actually, the attractions are exhilarating.
Yes.
Highly recommend.
Yeah. And so, next time we'll watch a film from my youth instead of yours.
Yes. Though I came to this one as an adult. I never saw this, I don't think, in my youth. I saw
Really?
I saw the Walt Disney television series and the animated film. But actually, for whatever reasons, maybe it wasn't shown on TV when I was growing up or whatever, I only kind of came to this as an adult, after hearing very much about it. So it's a thrilling film. I really highly recommend it. And I think it is available on Netflix at the moment.
Is it?
I think so. Or it might be Prime, but actually, it's definitely easily available to see. Should any of you want to, and I hope that after our discussion you do want to.
Yes.
Thank you very much for listening.
Yes, we are on SoundCloud, iTunes, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Yes.
Next time, Hook.
Thank you very much for listening.